We're going to shift our attention from Plato's Symposium to the other great dialogue that Plato wrote that's focused on erotic love. Plato's Phaedrus, named after the character, the young man, and a very handsome one at that, whom Socrates meets as they're both on their way to take a walk outside of the city walls. It turns out, we find out, that Phaedrus has just come from listening to one of the great writers and orators of the day, a man named Lysias. And Phaedrus has been listening to Lysias give a speech about erotic love. More precisely, Phaedrus has been listening to Lysias's speech that suggests to a good-looking young man, a potential beloved, that he should give his erotic favors to someone who, while he appreciates the young man's beauty, has not fallen in love with him. You should give your erotic favors, says Lysias' speech, to a non-lover. What could suggest such a paradoxical result? Well, Lysias tells us in great detail why it would be better to avoid someone who has fallen in love with you. The problem, it seems, is that a lover is by nature a madman, someone who's out of his mind. And so to put up with a lover is to put up with somebody who will do all sorts of crazy things. Lysias's speech is, to a large extent, a cataloging of all of the stupidities that people fall into when they fall in love. And more particularly, Lysias's speech lets us see how inconvenient it is for the beloved to be treated as the object of somebody's crazy love. In particular, Lysias claims in his speech, a lover, someone who's fallen in love with you, will be so possessive of you that he will have a bad effect on the rest of your life. He'll try to take you away from your family and your friends because he's jealous of your time. And more particularly, because he's paranoid that your family and friends might not think he's so great for you. So he doesn't want you talking to your parents or talking to your friends about whether he's a good lover for you. He wants all of your mental energies focused on him in a kind of self-protective obsession. At least as bad, Lysias goes on to say, your lover, the one who's fallen in love with you, will try to keep you more stupid and less manly than you otherwise would be. Your lover wants you to be completely dependent on him. And he wants to keep you cute. There's not really one Greek word for our word cute, but that's clearly what part of the problem is that Lysias is putting his finger on. Is it a good thing to be cute? Do any of you aspire to be cute? One hopes not. The line between being cute and being stupid is a very thin one. So part of what makes you so precious to your lover, to the one who's fallen in love with you, are a set of behaviors that in other circumstances you'd be embarrassed by because they'd make you seem lightheaded, giggly. But for some reason, your lover likes you to be that way. Your lover makes you, in this context, cultural context, your lover wants to make of the young man who becomes his beloved effeminate. Make him soft. Make him lisp. Keep his body from being in the sun and getting too suntanned, from his muscles getting too strong. So Lysias suggests that part of the problem of taking up with someone who falls in love with you is that your lover tends to want to keep you as a pet. This is true physically, where your lover will tend to find your body more attractive insofar as your body stays youthful and adolescent. But it's also true about the beloved's mind. The lover will tend to keep you away from adult conversation, to make you all the more available to the sort of nonsensical sweet talk that lovers' conversation seems so often to give itself over to. So, if you attach yourself to someone who's out of his mind, who's crazy in love with you, you will have attached yourself to someone who will make you worse and less manly, both in body and in soul. On the other hand, says Lysias, if you give your sexual favors to me, I'm not in love with you. I think you're pretty good looking, but I'm not in love with you because I'm still in my right mind. I won't do all these crazy things. I won't act like a slave around you and sleep outside your door at night or write songs about your family. Both of which were traditional things that lovers did to get the attention of the beloved in Greek society. You can supply your own examples of dopey things that people with a crush on you might do to get your attention nowadays. Maybe some of them still write songs about you and your family. So Lysias wants to say that the non-lover, that is, me, I'm a better person to establish an erotic relationship with. You'll get a lot of the same enjoyments you would from somebody who's crazy in love with you, but I'm not going to try to make you more effeminate. I'm not going to try to make you stupider. What I'm going to do, in a kind of nice arrangement, it reminds us very much of Pausanias' speech from the Symposium. What the non-lover, the rational guy, is going to do for you is kind of introduce you into adult society. He'll educate you. He'll help you become more cultured. And, of course, more connected, more networked. He'll, so to speak, initiate you into important social circles. So the non-lover's focus on your soul doesn't ask for you to be a silly, giggly pet, but rather to be a respectable young man that the non-lover can present with some pride as a kind of student, as a protege. Now, this speech is very much at home in a cultural situation where there's a lot of anxiety about erotic love of the sort we've already explored in the symposium. A lot of anxiety that erotic love seems to involve some loss of control, some dangerous riskiness of identity meltdown. So better to be removed from all of that. Now, one way to avoid all of the dangers of erotic identity meltdown is just to avoid erotic actions altogether. Pausanias might have given a speech about love that said, really, you should just stop having sex and just get an education. But of course he didn't say that. Pausanias justified getting sex from his beloved by claiming that he was his beloved's educator. Lysias, in his speech as the non-lover, tries much the same move, but it suffers from much the same problem. If rational control is all that great, and if erotic identity meltdown's all that bad, why are you telling this beautiful young man to give you his sexual favors at all? If it's really all about his mind, why are you putting your hand on his thigh? Now, let's think of the dramatic situation, the conversational situation in which Phaedrus has made this speech available to Socrates. Socrates happens to run into Phaedrus as they're both on their way for a walk out in nature, out away from everybody. So they'll be alone there. Phaedrus offers Socrates a speech that just so happens to make this claim. Oh, you rational one, you can enjoy the sexual favors of a beautiful young man without compromising your rational identity. Think of how convenient that situation is. Phaedrus doesn't have to say to Socrates anything quite as direct as, Socrates, I would be interested in being your beloved. Instead, he can put it all into a third person, Lysias. And indeed, he doesn't even put it into a speech where a beloved is telling a rational non-lover, hey, it'd be a great thing if you're my lover. He gives it even one more twist to allow for the indirection that flirting behavior so often assumes. What he gives Socrates is a speech that can be Socrates' speech. It can be a perfect speech for Socrates to give to Phaedrus. And think how wonderful it is that Socrates forces Phaedrus to give the very speech that Phaedrus would love to hear from Socrates. The levels of deniability have been managed here with real erotic genius. Try it the next time you're trying to chat up your roommate's date at an SYR. There's a displacement from direct first-person discourse or invitation or seduction, a displacement into a general theory about how love works or what would be good. So Lysias's speech is a first-person speech. But nobody in this dialogue is willing to take it over and say, yeah, you know, that's what I would say. All they do is say, boy, that's a really neat thing for somebody to say. So the mutual approach of Phaedrus and Socrates in this erotic banter is made possible exactly by the distancing of the discourse itself, by making it not something that I'm saying or that you're saying, but something that one might say. Somebody might say that this would be a good thing to do. And you force your conversation partner to make the substitution and to ask, just how do we fill in that variable X, that someone? Perhaps it's myself. Perhaps it's you. So there's a certain kind of role-playing that's going on here. Now, Socrates is a very tricky guy, and he can see the erotic situation here. He can see that something is on offer without being fully acknowledged. And what he says to Phaedrus then is, Phaedrus, you know, that speech of Lysias, there were some really good things about it, but I don't think it was really quite as rationalized as it could be. I think I can give a better version of that speech. Actually, he doesn't quite say that. He says, oh, I could never give a speech that could compete with that one. That one has some real flaws. It's really not as systematic as it could be. But I'm just an amateur. I couldn't possibly give a speech like that about how you should fall in love with a rational guy. And Phaedrus says, Socrates, I'm not going to play with you. Remember, we're alone here. I'm young and strong. Socrates says, I'm going to have to give in to you. He says, okay, look, I will give an even better version of Lysias' speech. Notice, he's not saying, I will give my own speech. It's still the indirection. It's still the displacement. But what twist does he give it? He makes this brilliant move because, look, in this indirection that structures flirting, you have to keep upping the stakes about substituting into the variable, into the X, into the indefinite someone who's proposed as a possibility, an erotic possibility. So what Socrates does, he says, this is the kind of speech that would be given by a man who's desperately in love with a beautiful beloved, but who presents himself as the rational, controlled non-lover. So Socrates says, I'm going to give an even better version of Lysias' speech. It's going to be more rational, more analytic. But the truth of the matter is, Phaedrus, a speaker who would give this kind of speech in praise of the non-lover would in fact be secretly motivated by a powerful erotic passion. the rationality of the speech is nothing more than a rationalization of an erotic passion that the speaker refuses to make fully public. So that rationality in Socrates' new and improved, more rational version of Lysias' praise of the non-lover, the rationality of that speech is a mask for erotic madness. The control of that speech is a vehicle for erotic identity meltdown, for a loss of control. So Socrates says he'll give the speech, but he'll give it as the speech of a lover who's making it easier for the beloved to accept his advances by presenting himself as a non-lover. So the level of indirection has been upped, but also you might say that the mask has worn much thinner. It's much easier for Phaedrus to reach through that mask and to touch the speaker, Socrates, not just as some person who might say this, but as the man who is saying it. Now, a lot of things are going on in this dialogue at once. Some of them are about the structure of erotic love. A lot of them are also about the nature of rhetoric. What makes a speech effective? What's the relationship between plausibility and truth? A whole range of questions like that. So those questions are at play here, but I'm not going to focus on them today. If you look at Socrates' restating of Lysias' speech, one passage will jump out particularly. Remember that in Lysias' speech, the argument was that the non-lover wants the beloved to be made effeminate and adolescent, both in soul and in body. In Socrates' reformulation of that point, Socrates has the lover masquerading as a non-lover say that the lover will deprive the beloved not just generally of something intellectual, something mature and adult, but rather that the lover will deprive the beloved of philosophy. So Socrates makes this worry that what a lover wants from you is something that causes you to degenerate or to be immature. Socrates reformulates that by focusing specifically on philosophy. So that the offer in Socrates' speech is, if you become my beloved, because I'm so rational, which of course is a masquerade, but if you become my beloved, I will make of you a philosopher. Now, Socrates never says, and right at this moment, Phaedrus, I'm thinking of you and me. But surely Phaedrus was thinking of it. The mask that Socrates is putting on, the fact that he's giving this as a third-person speech, allows him to say something very, very direct about why Phaedrus should be attracted to him. What is Plato up to in this complicated play of mirrors? That somehow it seems that in order to satisfy our erotic longings, in order to fall in love and make it, what, acceptable for the object of our erotic passion to reciprocate, we're forced or we're tempted to present ourselves as more rational than we really are. So that this dialogue, the Phaedrus, in its way is doing something like what the symposium was. It's starting out with a frame that puts a question mark over whether philosophy can be truthful, can be unmasked when it comes to the topic of erotic love. Now, another curious fact you'll remember is that Socrates said that he would give this speech, this rationalizing speech, but that he couldn't give it, so to speak, in his own name. So while he gives it, he says, I'm going to cover my head. So he's given this whole speech with his head covered up. This is a little weird. If you think about physically how they're arranged, what you'll notice is that they're lying on a little hill on the riverbank in the grass. And what does Socrates have to cover his head up with? Presumably his cloak. And one hardly dares to ask, when he covered his head, what did he uncover? But there's something very comical about this. That the very action of covering is itself an action of uncovering. Back in grade school, you're all over this by now, I'm sure. Your erotic lives have all become thoroughly rationalized and transparent. But back in grade school, if memory serves me, one sure way to find out if somebody had a crush on somebody else was whether or not they denied it. Do you like so-and-so? No, not at all. Never heard of her. There's something in the very framework of erotic desire that promotes a certain desire to hide. But the particular form that erotic hiding takes is a revelation of erotic desire. You're never more in the open, erotically speaking, than when you're trying to hide. So the dialogue is working with that oddity. There's another theme that I want you to keep in mind, to have in mind, as you read your way down into the Phaedrus. It happens very early on. Socrates says something very odd about self-knowledge. He says, this is... let me find the passage. This is at 228a. It's the bottom of page 2 of this translation. So this is very early on in the discussion. Socrates has just found out that Phaedrus has been with Lysias, this great orator and speechwriter. And he says, I'd love to hear that speech. And Phaedrus says, oh, Socrates, do you think that a mere dilettante like me could recite from memory in a manner worthy of him a speech that Lysias, the best of our writers, took such time and trouble to compose? Far from it. Though actually I would rather be able to do that than come into a large fortune. And notice how odd Socrates' response is to this. He says, oh, Phaedrus, if I don't know my Phaedrus, I must be forgetting who I am myself. If I don't know my Phaedrus, I must be forgetting who I am myself. Could it really be a condition of self-knowledge that you know somebody else? Could it be that by not knowing somebody else, to whom you're close, with whom, in some of the many senses of this word, with whom you're intimate? Could it be that somehow a lack of knowledge of that person is a function of your forgetting who you are yourself? Socrates doesn't just say, if I don't know you, Phaedrus, I don't know myself, which itself would already be complicated. No, what he says is, if I don't know you, I will have forgotten myself. Forgotten. That's different from merely not knowing. There'll be something about himself that he's overlooking, that he did know, that used to be present to him, but that he, so to speak, can't retrieve into consciousness right now. So right at the beginning of this dialogue, there's a question about how these speeches, this speech-making, will contribute to some sort of self-knowledge, or rather, to some sort of self-remembering, to a recovery of a sense of oneself. Could it be that part of the power of erotic love is that in erotic love we achieve a memory, a recovery, a recollection of something that we most truly are, something that we tend to forget when we're not in the presence of our beloved? That's the thought experiment that's behind the next speech that Socrates gives. A speech that he gives with his head uncovered. A speech that he gives as a kind of penance for the critique of erotic love and the lover that he's given in his rationalizing speech. What we'll look at on Monday, then, is this great middle speech of the Phaedrus, the so-called charioteer speech, in which Socrates gives an account of why we should give ourselves over to the dangers of erotic identity meltdown. Give ourselves over to that meltdown of a rationalizing identity in order to find a truer identity, an identity we can only find when we look in the eyes of our beloved. See you then.